stop. If you're considering buying a house in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you absolutely need to know these 3 things. Today, I'm gonna be drinking a Dogfish Head Craft Brewery 90-minute IPA. Super excited. I love myself a good IPA. So sometimes some of these topics aren't very fun, and honestly, just having a cold beer makes it a little easier to talk about. So either you're coming from a different state, you don't really know the law of the land here in Dallas-Fort Worth, or maybe you've lived here, but this is gonna be your first home and you just want to educate yourself. These are 3 things that I see day in, day out that I think you should really be aware about specific to real estate here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. So the very first thing that I just want you to know, get ready, expect it, honestly going with the mentality that it's gonna happen, is foundation issues or foundation repairs. The reality is, here in the Dallas-Fort Worth, the soil composition that we have is more of a clay-like material. So it's very moist and it's very, very slick. So what that tends to do is it unfortunately deteriorates the quality of the foundation or the sturdiness of a slab foundation over time. In the Metroplex, what our homes are built on are known as a slab foundation or post-tension foundation, which is basically just a thick piece of concrete with rebar in it that over time, as things shift, will develop these micro cracks, which eventually turn into possibly even bigger cracks. So I'm sure you may have been into a house where you're like the walls look a little bit off or something like that. And it's not because, well, it could happen. It just happens overnight, it just, falls like 3 or 4 inches, but over time, gradually, you don't really even notice it. These changes start to happen, and a lot of the materials in the house tend to either, morph or bend to this new foundation shape, or you end up seeing cracks in the walls or things end up happening. The reality again is that is just the law of the land. And there are tons and tons of foundation repair companies in the Metroplex because it happens all the time. I have clients that come up to me and say like, I will not buy a house with foundation issues. And I always say, okay, then you might just be a renter for life. I'm not saying that every single house in the Metroplex has foundation issues, but the majority of them tend to have foundation issues eventually. So unless you're buying a brand new house that still has a 10-year structural warranty, which includes the foundation, then you're most likely going to encounter some sort of minor or severe foundation issues in the near or some future point of your home ownership. Yes, some of these things can be costly, but my advice to you, and again, one of the reasons I call it number 1, is have your foundation regularly evaluated. When you see these minor changes, you can have a foundation company come and make these minor adjustments. Or if it's a major thing, they can put in these cement piers, which now means the foundation is on top of a cement pier, not necessarily the dirt. And that pier is usually dug all the way up down to bedrock, so it's on a more solid surface rather than, again, that clay-like material. Do not be afraid of foundation issues. In fact, I've had several clients who are like, okay, if it already had foundation issues and it's already been fixed and warranted, then if we have any sort of issues, we at least already know that there's a warranty on it, or we already know where the problems are and we know what we have to maintain. So moral of the story, do not be afraid of foundation issues. Do your homework. There are some foundation situations you should absolutely avoid, but for the most part, seeing some sort of foundation issue in our Metroplex is very, very common. The second thing that you want to be aware about is hailstorms or severe weather in the area. Now, I'm not saying something like a tropical storm or a hurricane like we see over in Houston or in Florida, but we do tend to have a lot of hailstorms. And why is this number 2? Is because a lot of people are surprised when they get when they move in or purchase a home for the first time in the Metroplex, and they see that their insurance policy now has 2 insurance deductibles. One is going to be maybe like your regular 2,000 or 2%, policy premium to if your house was to burn down or completely fall. Now, what you see is the second deductible, which is known as your hail or your storm deductible. And those deductibles are typically closer to $8,000 or $10,000, which is, for some areas, the cost of the roof. And why we see this is because hail is such an issue in the Metroplex that ultimately insurance companies end up paying out for a lot of roofs. And there's also just a group of people out there who just submit insurance claims for roofs that probably need to get replaced, but unfortunately do, and that drives up insurance premiums for the rest of us. So number 2 is just severe weather, with a little asterisk saying the reason I bring this up is because if you're not used to having to possibly replace your roof maybe every 5 to 8 years, then you're in for a little bit of a shock. On top of that, if you're relying for maybe your insurance to replace that, well, insurance companies have caught up, and as a result, there's a second insurance deductible that is literally labeled hail or storm or whatever it is. Now, is that the case all the time? No, there's still some policies out there that are a little bit less, or that still fall within that 2%, or that if you find a 1% policy, please let me know, that still fall within that category. But most of the time, you are going to have a higher insurance or out-of-pocket expense to repair your roof if you decide to repair your roof or file a claim or whatever it is. Number 3 is going to be HOAs. So if you live in the area and you've probably looked at homes and stuff, you see that there's just HOAs everywhere. Even if the home was built like in the 1990s, it's probably in some sort of like HOA. It's just very common in our area. And a lot of people that are coming from either outskirts of Texas or from out of state or whatever it is, coming into the Metroplex and are looking for a home, are shocked to know that pretty much a large majority of the homes in the most populated areas, such as the north cities of like Frisco, Plano, Allen, McKinney, Princeton, Anna, or some of the more south states of the Metroplex that are starting to be developed, will have HOAs. Okay, but let's say that you're like, I don't really care that it has HOA, like I'm gonna rent it out, or your life calls for some sort of different situation. HOAs all have different rules and operate based off of the bylaws that that community has set. Now, most of these bylaws are set pretty much by the developers when the community has been built or when it was, developed. And yes, many have changed by the homeowners themselves, making adjustments to these bylaws and all these different things. But the reality is a lot of them still abide by the same old playbook. And some of them have limitations on short-term rentals, which means no Airbnbs. Or some of them have limitations on just leases in general, which means you can't lease out your property. Some of them have limitations on what you can park in your driveway or how many cars you can park in your driveway. So, while HOAs can be relatively unrestricting in some areas, there are some HOAs that are highly restrictive in other areas. On the flip side, HOAs can play a very positive role. Now, can play, because there's some HOAs that are unfortunately very poorly operated that at the end of the day don't end up serving the homeowner in the way that they really should be. HOAs tend to help homeowners retain property values because you at least know that your neighbor down the street isn't going to be bringing in some sort of junk cars or painting their house purple or doing some sort of like outlandish thing that could ultimately bring down the property value for you and all of your other neighbors. So yes, there's pros and cons to HOAs. Every single HOA is different, but if you're moving into the Metroplex, that's the third thing that you should ultimately really consider. Now, we did say 3, but I'm gonna give you a 4th or a little bit of bonus one in case you are actually considering purchasing a new construction home. Now, there's a lot of development, especially further out away from like the city centers or some of the more popular, well-known cities. Actually, even within some of the well-known cities, you start to see a lot of what's known as a MUD or a PID. A PID is a public improvement district, or a MUD is a municipal utility district. And basically what this is an additional tax, property tax on your property. This is to help pay for the improvement or the development of the area. So, like an improvement district, or to bring in plumbing or water or whatever it is, all those things that, well, you kind of really want when you buy a house. Why is this something that you should also take into consideration? Is because Texas has relatively high property taxes. We don't have income tax, and that's why we pay higher property taxes. And when you add a PID or a MUD, what it does is it can increase your property taxes 1%, 1.5%, depends on the MUD or the PID. So if you are considering purchasing a new construction home or purchasing a home in a new development, or just in general, somewhere that may not be as well developed or incorporated into a city, you should definitely consider if it has a MUD or a PID, because it could have a significant impact on your monthly payment. So I hope this video helped you, or it gave you some sort of insight, or you learned something today. Ultimately, like I said, this whole channel is all about Texas and helping you make a right decision for you and your family. I hope you enjoyed this video, and honestly, I hope you learned something. If at the end of the day, all you enjoyed was just watching me drink a beer, then great. Like and subscribe, and we'll do it again next week. But if you have questions or you're considering moving or purchasing a house here in Texas, click the link below and schedule a Zoom call with me today. We'll see you guys next time.